Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyathela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, impeached Western Cape Judge President Dr John Hlophe has been elected to represent Parliament in the Judicial Service Commission. That's the former Western Cape Judge President. But is he the right man for the task, given that it's the same JSC that found him guilty of gross misconduct, leading to his impeachment as a judge? The rules of Parliament and the Constitution don't expressly bar him from serving on the JSC. But does it stand the moral and ethical test, this decision? And will Parliament be able to justify it as reasonable and rational if or when it's challenged in court? We'll speak to the MK Party's Chief Whip, Sihle Ngubane, and the DA's Glynnis Breytenbach. And then later, why did the Department of Education in Gauteng spend 100 million rand without conducting a wetland study? The public protector says there was lack of procedural integrity in the procurement and supply chain management processes. A critical wetland study was not conducted before construction began, and there was improper conduct and maladministration in the project. This led to overspending, cost overruns, and undue delays in the completion of the project. So, will there be consequence management? We'll speak to the man who wrote to the public protector back in 2020, raising concerns about this school, Musi Maimani, and the MEC of Education in Gauteng, Mayibuye School. But first, my comment. So it's official. Impeached former Western Cape Judge President and MK Party parliamentary leader Dr John Hlophe has been elected to the Judicial Service Commission. That's the same body that found him guilty of gross misconduct, making him one of the only two judges really to be stripped of their positions in our democratic history. Remember, the JSC had found Hlophe guilty of attempting to influence two justices of the Constitutional Court to violate their oaths of office. So he will now, as an impeached judge, take a seat on the very primary body whose responsibility is also to be a watchdog for judges. It is customary for the nomination and the election of MPs to bodies like the JSC to go ahead without much hassle in Parliament, since the issue is generally taken to be the prerogative of the nominating party. But political parties in Parliament are divided on this issue. Here's how the DA explained its position as they objected to Dr. Hlophe's election to the JSC.
Applicants to be interviewed by the Judicial Services Commission going forward will object and apply for the recusal of Dr. Hlophe on the basis the finding of gross misconduct renders him unfit to serve on a body that is determined to fitness, that is to determine the fitness and the propriety of others.
The MK Party was firm in their stance that there is no law that prohibits him from serving on the JSC.
Thank you. The attempt to erode the will of the people by dictating to the MKP which of its preferred candidates are to be designated to the JSC is constitutionally repulsive.
The EFF also sided with the MK Party.
Let's respect the fact that a certain number of people in South Africa have voted for Umkhonto as a party and have designated Dr. Hlophe to become a member of Parliament.
Now, the ANC also agreed that the current rules don't bar Dr. Hlophe from sitting on the JSC. The question now is this final decision by Parliament reasonable and rational? The tricky part here is that Dr. Hlophe is deemed to be fit and proper to serve in the National Assembly, right? So consequently, he should be fit and proper to represent the National Assembly on other forums. No? Why is he in Parliament if he can represent the same institution that he is part of? The argument the DA makes is that he has lost his status as a judge of the High Court in South Africa as a consequence of a finding of gross misconduct by the Judicial Services Commission. But he's not going to sit on the JSC as a member of the legal profession. He sits there as a politician, as someone who represents the party that has deployed him to Parliament, the party whose constituency voted for it to have presence in Parliament and subsequently represent Parliament and the public in other institutions. Nothing in law or even the Constitution prohibits Dr. Hlophe from representing Parliament in the JSC. The same way that nothing stopped impeached Public Protector, Advocate Glynnis from being part of the Justice Committee, whose responsibility is to provide oversight over the very office she was impeached from. It's the same Justice Committee that facilitated the process that led to her removal, wasn't it? But she serves there because that's a political process. So similarly so, in my view, with Dr. Hlophe, it's our political system that allows him to be nominated by his party to serve on the JSC, even though it's an independent organization that sits outside of Parliament. If anything, any objection to this ought to be directed at our political system for allowing this. So maybe you need to be angry at the rules of the National Assembly and the Constitution. Maybe you need to advocate for the rules to change. One of the things I've been asking myself is how much influence do we think Dr. Hlophe is going to wield in the JSC? He's not the only politician there. There are how many other commissioners? Probably over 20 other commissioners who sit on the JSC. His voice alone is not going to influence the outcome of any process in that organization. Other commissioners have an opportunity to challenge him if he asks questions that are not in line with what the JSC wants to achieve, or hold a position that contradicts the values and spirit of the organization. I mean, the chair of the JSC can always intervene, like he has in the past. We need to remember that the JSC isn't constituted to only include legal practitioners. It's constituted to include politicians who represent you and I as members of the public. And you're not always going to like the politicians who serve in that committee, or politicians who have questions that they ask when judges are interviewed, and maybe you don't like their questions. But that organization is constituted that way to represent different constituencies. The will of the people must be given expression even in the JSC, and that comes through politicians whose parties people have elected to the National Assembly. Now, having said that, not everything is about rules and legalities. Sometimes ethical and moral considerations should be made. So yes, legally, this may stand. But is it morally and ethically correct? I don't think so. But is that sufficient ground to block Dr. Hlophe from sitting in the JSC? I don't think so. You really can't explain this cruel irony that aspiring judicial officers will be assessed on their ethics, on their integrity, on their fitness for judicial office by a commissioner who himself has been found guilty of gross misconduct. But the reality here is their fate is not only in the hands of Dr. Hlophe. That's why there are other commissioners. There's no doubt that this decision will be a consequence of legal challenge. And the question the courts will have to answer is whether this decision by Parliament was rational and reasonable, because Section 165 of the Constitution says, and I quote here, organs of state through legislative and other measures must assist and protect the courts to ensure independence, impartiality, dignity, accessibility, and effectiveness of the courts, end quote. I'm not convinced that the election of one member to the JSC who was found guilty by the same body goes against this constitutional principle, because that person is not the only member of the JSC. So the question I'm asking you tonight is, what do you make of this decision by Parliament to elect Dr. John Hlophe as one of the commissioners in the JSC? Do you think the National Assembly has acted in a reasonable and rational manner? Please send us your WhatsApp voice note right now on 078 459 1897. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you're sending the voice note from. And please keep it at 30 seconds. Alternatively, you can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. After the break, we bring in the MK Party's Chief Whip and the DA's Glynnis Breytenbach. Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. The National Assembly has elected MK Party Parliamentary Leader Dr. John Hlophe and several other MPs to serve on the JSC. The DA has objected to his nomination, citing his impeachment for gross misconduct as one of its reasons. DA spokesperson on Justice and Constitutional Development, Glynnis Breytenbach, joins us now via Teams. Glynnis, thank you so much for making time for us. Which rules of the National Assembly or the Constitution do you base your objection on?
We don't base it on any rules of the National Assembly. As you set out in your long summation of the matter just now, there's nothing in the rules of Parliament that bar Dr. Hlophe from serving as a Member of Parliament, sadly, and nothing that prevents him being nominated as a member of the Judicial Services Commission as the rules stand at the moment. There's clearly a deficiency in the rules that must be addressed with a great deal of urgency. The fact of the matter is that this is a unique occurrence. As you already mentioned, Dr. Hlophe is the first judge in democratic South Africa to be impeached. He was removed from his office as a judge for gross misconduct for the matters that you set out. And is therefore unfit to sit on the bench, unfit to sit in judgment of others. And he was found guilty of gross misconduct by the Judicial Services Commission. Mm-hmm. That is their job, part of their job. And he was impeached by Parliament as a result. The members of Parliament agreed that his conduct was so beyond the pale that he should be impeached, and he was. Mm-hmm. So for him to now go and sit on the body that appoints judges, that interviews judges and appoints judges, when he himself has been found unfit to serve in the position of a judge, beggars the imagination. It demonstrates a complete lack of shame. Mm-hmm. It's unethical in my view, and certainly the decision by the National Assembly to continue with this process and allow him to be appointed, I believe will be found to be wanting on the grounds of reasonableness and rationality, if it's taken on review.
So do you accept, though, that until the rules and the Constitution are amended to clearly define what we are dealing with now, the established rules and practices of Parliament that political parties could nominate their own representatives to the JSC has to be respected?
Certainly, those rules must be respected in all instances. One would expect a responsible political party to act reasonably and rationally, but I emphasize responsible. And you also mentioned, the impeached public protector, Ms. Nkwebane, who sits on the Justice Portfolio Committee. As a matter of interest, it wasn't the Justice Portfolio Committee that impeached her. It was the Section 194 Ad Hoc Committee that impeached her. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is she now sits on the Justice Portfolio Committee, which is causing problems. It's already caused problems. We had to interview for a replacement deputy public protector. She insisted on participating in the process, despite the fact that we pointed out that she was conflicted. The process ran against our advice, and it was then had to be set aside at the very end, and now it's going to be redone at enormous expense to the taxpayer, mm-hmm. because the legal opinion that was obtained from Parliament has now found that she couldn't participate in that procedure. Yeah. So already it's causing problems. Impeached people do not belong in Parliament, and that's very clear. And Dr. Hlophe does not belong at the JSC, and that's very clear.
What do you think will be the challenges there? Because as I argued in my comment, then we must be angry at our political party system, because there are many questions that people may raise about the ANC or even the Democratic Alliance about the kind of people they deploy to Parliament and whether or not these are people that are fit to be honorable members. That's the political system and how it's designed. So Hlophe is coming through that system. What do you think his presence in the JSC is going to do that somehow paralyzes the work of that institution?
Well, apart from it being morally and ethically offensive, and that the situation is deeply repugnant. The fact of the matter is that applicants are entitled to ask any one of the members to recuse themselves if they believe they are not going to be objective.
Yeah.
And applicants will unquestionably request Dr. Hlophe to recuse himself. I've got no doubt.
On what basis will they make? What do you think is the basis they will make that appeal for him to recuse himself?
Well, because he's not fit and proper to sit there in their view, and in mine either. And the fact that he's there is irrational and unreasonable, and therefore offends the administrative functions of the National Assembly. And if they do ask him to recuse himself and he refuses, then that will be the subject of litigation. And the JSC will be tied up in endless litigation and will get no work done.
Will it be endless?
That is, of course, the whole objective here, is to render the JSC unfunctionable, render the JSC unable to carry out its functions, one, because he has an axe to grind with the JSC, and two, because it's MK's stated objective in their election manifesto that they wish to overthrow the Constitution, have it set aside and run the country as a parliamentary governing model, the same type of governing model that we had before 1994, and we all know what happened then. So that is their stated objective, and this is a step in that direction. It's very clear what they're up to.
Okay, so, I mean, obviously here we need constitutional clarity. So, in fact, it must be welcomed that someone who comes to the JSC for interviews and wants Judge John Hlophe, the impeached Judge John Hlophe, to recuse himself of the matter.
Judge, so please don't refer to him as Judge John Hlophe.
Which is why I just corrected myself before you came in there. He's an impeached judge. So if someone comes through and says, Dr. John Hlophe, you are not fit and proper to come here, and we want you to recuse yourself, he refuses, the chairperson takes it on, and they go and they get seek legal clarity, it ends up in the court. We should welcome that, because that is going to give us clarity on how the JSC must deal with the matter. And once there's clarity that is provided, other 10 people who follow are not going to use the same basis because the court would have clarified the matter.
Certainly, I hope that we can clarify the matter long before it lands up being a problem for the JSC to deal with. I've got no doubt that that somebody, one or other NGO, or more than one, will take this matter, this decision of the National Assembly on review as being irrational and unreasonable.
Yeah, I suppose the point I'm trying to make is we must not create an impression that the JSC is somehow going to be in paralysis because so many people will be taking it to court. If we have one organization or one judge who objects to Judge Hlophe sitting on the JSC, takes it to court, that gives us that constitutional clarity. The JSC can continue with its work once we have that constitutional clarity on how the JSC must deal with his position as a commissioner.
Yes, you see, that's the problem, exactly the problem. It's not for the JSC to deal with his position as a commissioner. He's sent there as a representative of the National Assembly. It's for the National Assembly to deal with it. They've now dealt with it, in my view, incorrectly. One application for a recusal doesn't mean that will settle the matter, because it won't change the fact that he's sent there by the National Assembly. So it becomes a very convoluted, difficult and complex legal argument, and will tie the JSC up for time that we just don't have. Already the JSC struggles to get through its workload. Already there's a massive shortage of judges on the bench. We don't need this extra delay that this is going to cause, when it can so easily be avoided by appointing somebody who is fit and proper. Somewhere in the MK party, they must have someone who's fit and proper.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the people that will be challenging his position as commissioner in the JSC will have a strong case if they go to court on the basis of the ethical and moral argument? Because at the end of the day, the court will also want to deal with the legalities. And as you've admitted and you've expressly stated, nothing in the law and the Constitution bars him from sitting on the JSC.
No, I said nothing in the law prevents him from sitting as a member of the National Assembly, and therefore nothing prevents them from nominating him. I do not agree that there's nothing preventing him from being successfully appointed to the JSC. our argument is and has been and always will be that the decision to send him there is unreasonable and irrational and therefore will fail the test.
Okay, help us understand what you are basing that on. Are you basing it based on Section 165 of the Constitution?
Yes, that too.
What does it say exactly that prevents it?
I don't have the Constitution in front of me, and I can't quote sections of it verbatim. The fact of the matter is that the National Assembly's actions in this type of instance, where it's an administrative action, are required to act in a rational and reasonable fashion. That's been decided by the courts many times before in many decisions. And so that is a requirement. And if the National Assembly fails to act reasonably or rationally, then we will be held accountable. So I'm quite sure that by tomorrow morning, some NGO will file papers taking the National Assembly's decision on review. And then we'll see whether we've acted rationally or reasonably, and I don't think we have.
All right. The DA, Glynnis Breytenbach, thank you so much for making time for us. I wanted to spend some time to go through Section 165 of the Constitution. If you checked out my comment in the beginning, I'd read it, and what it expressly says, I'm still not convinced that it's actually quite sufficient in that you can quote that and says that is very clear in that it prevents Parliament from appointing him to sit on the JSC. But as Glynnis Breytenbach says, we have to wait until the matter is dealt with in court. We are expecting some NGOs to challenge this particular issue because some feel that this decision by Parliament is not reasonable and rational, and hopefully the courts will clarify that. Now, the MK party has defended its decision to nominate impeached Judge John Hlophe to serve on the JSC. The MK party's chief whip, Sihle Ngubane, joins me now via Teams. Thank you so much for making time for us, Mr. Ngubane. I don't think many will argue with you on the issue of law and the rules of Parliament, but do you think this stands the moral and ethical test?
Thank you very much, Clement, and to your viewers at home for giving MK this opportunity to explain his stance on Judge Hlophe's appointment to the JSC. So when it comes to the entitlement of MK party to its allocations on committees, there is no law and there is no rule, Clement, that talks to those moral values and whatever. It's a different category now of trying to elect members of Parliament to sit on committees of Parliament. As it stands now, members of Parliament MK is entitled to appoint Judge Hlophe to the JSC of Parliament.
So beyond the qualification, because one of the things you indicated is how qualified he is to even sit in the JSC, do you not think that someone who sits in this organization needs to be ethical and have integrity?
Yes, Clemens. Judge Hlophe is one of those ethical person and a person of integrity, who is beyond reproach. You remember, Clemens, when you are thrown in a deep, especially trying to practice as a judge in a highly racist environment like Cape Town, Western Cape itself, you'll find all this intimidation by the racist DA, which is unconstitutional, where they will try to bully you to say you do not qualify to get into these committees and to not in these committees. But Judge Hlophe is the best suited candidate that we can fill for this position. The bullying of the DA about morale and whatever is neither here nor here. Is neither here nor there. Judge Hlophe is the best candidate that we filled in to assist the country, Clemens. Remember, Assembly, the legislature in Cape Town is a house of laws where laws are made. So who else in this country can we submit other than Judge Hlophe, who's fit for the purpose?
Yeah, I mean, when you say, though, that he's beyond reproach, this is a man that the JSC found of gross misconduct. He's tried to go to various levels of the courts, and he has lost there. I mean, he's not beyond reproach by definition.
He is beyond reproach. So he was impeached from the court. He was impeached in the Parliament. So now he comes back as a member of Parliament. So again, Clemens, I'm saying it to you, that has passed for Judge Hlophe. Now, Judge Hlophe is coming as a representative of MK to represent MK. It's an entitlement position of the JSC.
So
the bullying of the DA about morals is neither here nor there.
Okay,
the DA is just bullying us about morals. So does it mean we must now go check all these other appointments of their morals and start to categorize them that they are not fit to be judges? Because we can go to that level of scrutinizing members of parliament that must sit into committees, but there is no justification of what they are saying. It's just the bullying and the racist attitude that is the DA is trying to bully MK on.
And I suppose that those that are raising concerns about Judge Hlophe are asking, how does he test people on their ethics as the commissioner when he himself was found to be unethical as a judge? I mean, that's a fundamental contradiction. I can't think of anyone else who sits in the JSC who faces a similar contradiction.
You remember, Clemens, in the interviews of the JSE, you interview people based on their experience and work, how they performed in their experiences of law. You just check all those things. Hence, I'm saying to you, the bullying by the DA, MK does not take it about all of a sudden they raises issues of morale. Hence, I'm saying to you, we cannot have categories of judging people whom are appointed by political parties through the entitlement of the numbers. When it comes to Judge Hlophe, we start to raise frivolous morals when we haven't raised to the others. We need to use the same standard on all. Here, Judge Hlophe qualifies 100% to be in the JSC because he will be interviewing judge. Remember, Judge Hlophe has been a lecturer as well of law and is a PhD Cambridge graduate of law, doctor of law, that has all the qualifications to interview judges for the positions that they want to fill as judges.
Are you not worried that there may be situations where he will be conflicted? What happens when some of the judges that he has worked with, for instance, appear before the JSC and they're being interviewed, I don't know, for a position, say, in the Constitutional Court?
He will interview them. He will just interview those judges. We totally, as MK, we're not worried at all about those sentiments by the DA. I'm emphasizing again, the issue of morale is just the bullying tactics of the racist DA. It is unconstitutional conduct of the Democratic Alliance to try and bully us about a Judge Hlophe that is not qualified for the position. It's not part of the requirements to sit in the JSC.
Okay, and I was trying to move away from the issue of politics and just deal in law with the issue of conflict of interest. Because if you remember, the former public protector, Advocate Glynnis, who sits on the Justice Committee, at some point, she refused to recuse herself, even though parliamentary legal advisors said he should, because there were people that were being interviewed for positions in the public protector's office that he had relations with in the past. Are you satisfied and are you okay with the reality that there may be instances where Dr. John Hlophe will be requested to recuse himself if he is dealing with people that he may be seen to be in conflict in the JSC, given their previous relationship?
And if that scenario, Clemens, comes, I guarantee you Judge Hlophe will recuse himself if the need arises. But currently, there's no such needs that arise for Judge Hlophe to sit in the JSC. Judge Hlophe is a law-abiding citizen. He understood law from A to Z. He knows everything about law. When the time for him to recuse himself, if necessary, I guarantee you Judge Hlophe will do that. But as I stand now, I'm telling you, we are giving South Africa the best candidate to craft the laws of South Africa.
All right. The MK Party's Chief Whip, Sihle Ngubane, thank you so much for making time for us and stating your position on why you support and stand firm in your nomination and now subsequent election of Dr. John Hlophe to represent Parliament in the JSC. We've been asking you a question this evening about this decision Parliament has taken. What do you make of it? Do you think that it is rational, that it is reasonable? We'll go through your tweets and some of your voice notes after the break. Also, coming up later, that conversation with the Education MEC in Gauteng and Musi Maimane about 100 million rand that was spent on building a school, and yet no study was done on the land that school was built. The public protector now has come out to say the school was built on wetland. Are there going to be consequences? That's our next conversation. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, Build One South Africa says it wants the city of Johannesburg to recoup all the money that was wasted to build Mayibuye Primary School in Tembisa. It has been 8 years since contractors started building the school, but the school is yet to be occupied. The public protector has requested the Gauteng Department of Infrastructure Development to submit a report within 60 days. BOSA leader Musi Maimane joins us now via Teams. Mr. Maimane, thank you so much for making time for us. When you lodged the complaint in 2020, what did you pick up?
Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. When we were busy with the issue of oversight in a community in Tembisa, many residents called us and said this was a school that was left open. I went and inspected the school for myself, and I discovered a half-built building. There was water because the school was built on a swamp, which means that the report that was initially done in making sure that the school actually was built on proper ground that was designed for it was seeping into the school. And I can recall quite deliberately much of what was already built as infrastructure was already starting to be destroyed. And so it was clear that no project scope was put forward. Secondly, this was a wasteful expenditure. And thirdly, young people who were in the community of Tembisa were left without a school and asked to go to other places in the community. And in fact, the next plan was to build temporary schooling for them, which felt to me at the time heightened levels of wasteful and corrupt activity, in my view.
What do you think really transpired here? Because it's difficult to understand how one of the most basic engineering requirements was simply ignored.
No, absolutely. And I think that there was a need, naturally, in a community like Tembisa that is growing, there was an absolute need for there to be a school. So in the acts where effectively people identify a community, the need is there, poor contractors were put on the table. I've requested that these contractors be investigated and be scrapped off the list of suppliers for the Gauteng department. For the Gauteng provincial government, certainly. And more than anything, we need to recoup these monies, because I certainly think that unless you do that, you send a strong message that people can approve poor reports, continue with shoddy work, and get away with it. And I certainly think that I'll be engaging the public protector, because I think that remedial actions are simply not strong enough.
On what basis do you think the money should be recouped, and how much money exactly do you think must be recouped? Because the school has been built. The public protector didn't necessarily find that money has been stolen. The school is there. So on what basis do you want money to be paid back?
Well, the school, if you go to the school, has not been occupied for the last 8 years because, one, whoever accepted and drafted the report to say the school could be built on swampland certainly produced a false report, because clearly there were challenges with where the school was built. That's a starting point. The second issue is the fact that when you look at the infrastructure, already now that infrastructure has started to fall apart. So it needs to be either rebuilt or compensated for if it's going to be the safety of learners to come into the school. And so ultimately, you cannot simply say to yourself, a contractor can get away with building on false ground or shaky ground, allowing the danger of South African children, and furthermore, having to have the project repeated over and over again and hope that you'll get away with it. It's simply unacceptable. If we carry on this practice as a country, we will be building schools 2 or 3 times over at the rate that we are going.
Do you think there are other schools out there that are facing the same challenge from your own observation and assessment?
Well, I certainly have been to Orlando West, where another school was left there. Again, poor contracting. it was left open. And then ultimately the schools, the children in that community were being asked to now suddenly be bused to other places, which means the quality of education is impacted. So there are a number of schools, and I've asked that Parliament give us a full list. I'll be engaging the Minister of Education as soon as she settles in to give us a full list of countrywide where schools have been built and unoccupied and where there's been wasteful expenditure in this regard. We can ill afford it, given that so many of our children end up studying in, dying in pit latrines, etc., etc.
What would you like the Department of Education in Gauteng to do to avoid a similar situation in the future?
One, I've asked our public representative there, Ayanda Ali, to put together a request for an ad hoc committee so that the monitoring of this particular recuperating of funds takes place. Furthermore, to ensure that ultimately the building and procurement of future schools, that there's better scrutiny on contracting going forward so that you don't have this matter get repeated again. And let's ensure that contractors that act in scrupulous manner are removed from the supplier database of the province. This way we eradicate corruption. And if there's political interference and adjudicating the contracts that end up in such a manner, those political principles must be held accountable.
Yeah, Musi, you raised this issue almost 4 years ago. When you raised it with the department, what did they say? What did they do?
Well, I was assured that the Gauteng department would then run its own oversight committee. I remember at the time they said that members of that portfolio committee in education would come and do an oversight. But that would be tantamount to people who are players ultimately becoming referees. And I felt that it was unacceptable. That's why we raised it with a public protector. And we need to ensure that independent bodies give oversight to the space, because clearly internal controls had failed within the Gauteng Department of Education. And thus the finding that we have today from the public protector.
And I mean, since 2020, I imagine construction continued during that time. Had they acted early enough, what difference do you think that would have made?
It would have made a significant difference. We wouldn't have gone down a track of building a school on land that cannot be able to have a school on it. When I went to the school, there used to be a nursery school that was operating right next door to the said site. And when you went to that nursery school, the teachers there already had raised concern that they themselves could not stay there because water was seeping into the building. So how the department felt that just a few meters away, the land would be different, to me, is the anomaly. So the action should have been taken, and prevention in this instance would have been far better than cure. And we would have prevented this issue of wasteful expenditure. But instead, it continued for the benefit of people. And that's why I think a further investigation must be required as to who the decision makers were, who were the tender adjudicators. And those tender adjudicators and the contractors must come to the bottom of where actually this decision to go ahead, given the state of the area that it was being built on was it was common cause even for the community to know that this was a swamp and therefore no school could be built or permanent infrastructure could be built.
All right, Bossa leader Musi Maimane, thank you so much for making time for us on Face the Nation tonight. Now, the Gauteng Education Department says it will implement the public protector's remedial actions into this 82 million rand or so Mayibuye Primary School debacle. Some are putting that amount at about 100 million rand. The school, situated in Tembisa, east of Johannesburg, has been built on a sewer line, and that has resulted in the facility not being used for close to 7 years. Now, the public protector's investigation has now found that a critical wetland study was not conducted before construction began, suggesting further improper conduct and maladministration. Let's bring in now the Gauteng Education MEC, Madume Chulani, who's facing the nation tonight. MEC, thank you for making time for us. What did the Department of Education do back in 2020 when this matter was flagged by Musi Maimane?
No, thank you very much. Good evening to your viewers. I've been listening to Mr. Maimane. I really think he's quite ill-informed, or if not aloof. The school is operational as we speak now. There are learners in class. Completely, we've taken all the learners from the previous mobile school. The only areas that are left that we are currently concluding is the school hall, as well as the play area, the court, the combi courts. That's the only areas that are left for completion, but the learners are high in that school. And it's actually one of our model schools, I have to say, because we've introduced what we call a classroom of the future there, where a classroom is fitted with high-end cameras to monitor the kids. If the kids are sick, it shows on the screen. The teacher can get a report that the child is hot, the temperature is high, the child is not focusing, is sleeping in class. It gives a report at the end of the week. So that school, we're using it as a future model school for all our schools going forward.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he's really talking about. And the wetland that he's talking about, we did an investigation on it. We looked into it, and it's actually found that it's not a wetland. It's a sewer pipe. It's a sewer pipe that was leaking, and over a period of time, the whole area started being wet. So working with the municipality, we were able to resolve that pipe. They fixed the pipe, put a new pipe there. So there's no longer leakages, because that wet area that he's talking about, and it was also at the border of the school, affecting the school hall. That's why I was saying they're still fixing the school hall. So that's the only part. But all the other aspects are fine. The school is clean, the structure is there. You can, in fact, I invite him to go there.
So the public protector says Dr. Hlophe of Index Pty Limited was commissioned for the wetland study after the construction had already commenced on site. How do you explain that? That sounds to me like a basic engineering, building, construction thing to do before building can commence. Why did you only commission the study after construction had begun?
Yeah. Now, let me explain how this works. We, as the Department of Education, we are responsible for the schools. So what we do when there's an opportunity and a need to build, we give it to DID. The infrastructure development is the one that does all the consulting, the appointment of consultant, engineers, contractor. They do all of that. So now within the recommendation, it speaks about us being, it speaks about the monitoring of projects that we had handed over to DID collaboratively, project costs, and those are the areas that we've begun as well to do very strongly in monitoring the project that we have given to DID for implementation. So if that question would best ask the DID they'll explain as to how did they appoint this contractor, how did they start building without conducting this study. They're the best position. But from our side as education, we don't build. Infrastructure builds on our behalf.
Yeah, but surely that's a question you would have asked to your colleague. Yes. This is someone you sit in cabinet with. You represent government here. When you've asked, guys, it doesn't make sense. How do you go ahead and start a construction when you have not done a study on whether or not that's dolomitic land? What answers did you get from your colleagues?
What I can tell you, Clement, is that those studies are always conducted. That's why most of the infrastructure projects go well. So if there was an area maybe they would have missed, it's something else.
So MEC, it's not if. We're talking about the report of the public protector that is conclusive. In that report, she doesn't say if. She says the government failed to commission a wetland study. It only began after construction, and that's not the only thing. She says no water use license authorization application was submitted in relation to the construction of the school. The school wasn't issued an occupancy certificate due to the safety issues. This wasn't the first time government actually builds a school. How were these boxes not ticked?
Like I said, I want to agree with you that those are boxes that should be ticked. And if now, because the public protectors, obviously then from our side, where we're sitting now, I want to speak at the end level, that now occupancy certificate was approved, learners are in class. So the whole process as it began, there is a process that's been undertaken, and DID is best positioned to explain to you how far are they with regard to dealing with the weaknesses that was picked up by the public protector.
Yeah.
But on our side, we have committed to implement the remedial action that the public protectors had highlighted and expected of us as GDA.
How are you going to implement that remedial action? Because clearly, we're not just talking about weaknesses here. We're talking about failures of the most basic of things. Part of what the public protector has found is that there was lack of procedural integrity in the procurement and supply chain management processes. A critical wetland study was not conducted before construction, as we have already discussed. There was improper conduct and maladministration. Where's consequence management? Who's going to be held accountable?
One of the things that we are doing as provincial government, we started a process of blacklisting contractors who don't complete projects. That we've begun to do. Now, it speaks about the regularity in procurement. I think that, like I've said, some of the questions should be taken to the infrastructure development department to respond, because as education, we don't procure. We're not responsible for the procuring of appointment of service providers, consultants, and contractors. That is the responsibility that lies solely with infrastructure development. So they need to be the best position to respond. But from our side, obviously, consequence management, we do take it up with them. We do. We have had incidences. For example, this project. Let me just use this project as an example. When we realized that there were problems, we then agreed, both infrastructure and GDE, that let's separate the work function. GDE was responsible for dealing with the internal aspect, meaning inside the school. Infrastructure deals with the challenges that are outside the school. And that's how we collaboratively work together to ensure that we complete the project within cost and on time.
Is it fair, though, to say, as the Gauteng government, you do support that the contractors who've been involved here, where failures have been identified, will be removed from your database and will be blacklisted?
Yes, that's the route we are taking, definitely. Okay,
so how much time is left before the entire process or project can be completed? You mentioned that the school hall is the one that still is being fixed. The work is still being done there. When is that expected to be completed?
What I can tell you, within a month will be done, definitely. It's already complete. It's just obviously the touch-ups and then occupancy certificates, then they're done, actually. I don't want to say it's 99% that's completed.
Are there other schools in the province that may be facing this predicament? Musi Maimane seems to suggest that he has visited other schools, and there are other schools that are completed, but they've not been occupied by the learners.
Once a school is completed, we'll always occupy it. That's why I'm saying that I'm worried about these comments. When the school is complete, we'll occupy it. When we don't occupy, when we don't have the occupancy certificate, that's when we don't occupy it. So if he says that the school that is completed, we have not occupied, he needs to show us where is that school. But where we are sitting, all the schools that we have not occupied while they are still under construction, we can't occupy it, and that's where we are.
Yeah. Speaking of schools, as we wrap up, do you have any update for us on the accountability that members of the public are still waiting for on that 400 million rand that was spent by the department to disinfect schools for 3 months during COVID-19? Has anyone been held accountable for that?
Yes, we did. There was a recommendation that a certain number of employees should be taken through disciplinary process. The report came back to us, and the employees, there were 3. One of them resigned before the completion of the report, and the other 2, we received the recommendation, which was dismissal, and we dismissed them as we speak.
And in terms of political accountability?
What do you mean political accountability, Clement? Because remember, now when we speak about procurement, the politicians are never involved in those aspects. So when we want to say politicians should be held accountable, it makes it very difficult. So the process was undertaken, the reports came, and it gave us a recommendation to dismiss senior officials in the department, and we've done that.
So
we've acted on it. So there are officials that are dismissed as we speak to you now.
All right. So you don't want to take accountability as political principles in cases where there's corruption, but you're so quick to take the pride when the department actually has a clean audit.
Firstly, let me go. When you say accountability, when we take action, like the action that was taken to ensure that there was a process where those who were liable in this decontamination a scandal, if I can use that, and we dismiss them, that's being accountable.
Okay. MEC of Education in Gauteng, Mayibuye School, thank you so much for making time for us. It's always so interesting to see politicians want to take credit when the department are doing so well. The minute there's corruption somewhere that's involved, oh no, now they bring in the separation of powers between the executive and the accounting officers. Let's now ask you that question we've been asking throughout the show tonight. We've been asking you what you make of the decision by Parliament to elect Dr. John Hlophe as one of the commissioners in the JSC. Do you think the National Assembly has acted in a reasonable and rational manner? Let's take a look at some of the tweets that have come through. Sake says, Evening Clement, his party was democratically elected. Him being in the JSC doesn't break any rules. Then he has a right to serve there. I bet some of those who support his impeachment in Parliament don't even know why he was being impeached. Siabulela says, good evening, Clement, and good evening to the viewers at home. What the ANC Chief Whip said proves vital as Parliament. The rejection seemed more personal than parliamentary. On general ethics, though, it does not make sense to hire someone to such a responsibility when they failed. The Big Elephant says there's no law or rules that prohibited him from standing as a member of the JSC. I don't see any problem. Songo says it's unfortunate because it is just a political decision and morally wrong. Melikaya says if all MPs in the National Assembly are eligible for participating in different parliamentary assignments, the debate about Dr. Hlophe for being a JSC member exposes a deep hatred for him from his opponents. South Africans deserve adequately qualified MPs to engage intellectually on matters. Thank you so much for your tweets. Let's now listen to some of the voice notes that have come through on this issue of Dr. John Hlophe dividing political parties in Parliament. Here's what some of you have had to say.
Hi, my name is Keith Coffey. I'm from Shorterville in Quebec. I just feel he shouldn't be there. He's a disgraced judge. And really, it's a shame that he can't. How can he sit in judgment of appointing other people, other judges, when he himself is a disgraced judge?
Yes, good evening, Clement. Mtuzwane from Newcastle. The objection from DA that Dr. Hlophe shouldn't be part of the JSC, I find it to be very irrational. And then is premised on hate that they have towards Dr. Hlophe. So Dr. Hlophe is there on the ticket of MK representing us, and then as a politician, not as a judge. So I support his appointment.
From where I'm sitting, Dr. Hlophe has been elected by his political party to be part of the collective. So there's nothing wrong. Either legally, morally, or politically. He has been elected, he must ascend to the stage, and there's no way that an individual can become a negative influence. From Andres and Ferreira Val, Gauteng.
All right, thank you so much for engaging with us on Face the Nation tonight. This is where we come to the end of the show. We'll be back on Thursday at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching. Cheers.